Hello, everyone. I'm Becca, dietitian by trade, mom 24/7, wife from the start, and when there's a few extra hours in the day, you might find me hitting the trails or on horseback.
And I'm Kara, a therapist to women, a mom to a boy, an entrepreneur, mountain junkie, and a postpartum runner.
And this is Fit for a Queen, a podcast that's devoted to the female athlete wanting to balance the teeter-totter of all the things we desire out of life as women: performance, health, intellect, and taking time for self, even if we only get 1 minute out of the day.
We're so excited to be bringing you the queens in the athletic world who have done just that. Okay, ladies, take a seat at your thrones, grab your crowns, and welcome to Fit for a Queen. Today we're joined by Dr. Nicola Rinaldi. Nicola has a PhD in computational biology from MIT. After graduating, she worked for a biotechnology company while pursuing her dreams of a family, which were thwarted by a diagnosis of hypothalamic amenorrhea, so having no periods. 18 months of trying to conceive followed. She spent hours on research using the knowledge gained to work on recovery. Concurrently, she tried the medical route to pregnancy with multiple doctor visits, injections, and ultrasounds, resulting only in failure. Ultimately, she was able to achieve a natural pregnancy. Since that time, Nicola has shared her knowledge of the path to recovery, helping hundreds of others achieve their dreams of womanhood and pregnancy. She has spent the last 3 years as a stay-at-home mom with her 3 boys while writing a comprehensive guide to recovery, a book called No Period, Now What? Dr. Rinaldi, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so fun to be here.
I love this topic. So I struggled with infertility as well and was diagnosed with PCOS. I work in the field of motherhood and infertility. So I loved all aspects of your book, and it was so interesting. So tell us a little bit more of your own path to motherhood, and why did you decide to write this book?
So my path to motherhood was obviously much longer than I expected or hoped. I think that, many of us think that when we decide we want to have kids, it's just going to happen because you hear all the stories of people getting pregnant right away. And, I was thinking about having kids when I was in graduate school. I wanted to wait until I was done because the idea of having a newborn and working on a PhD at the same time just did not seem like fun. Yes. Some people do it, but I wanted to wait. And so towards the end of my graduate career, I was kind of thinking about, okay, I want to get a job. I want to get pregnant fairly soon thereafter. And, how's that all going to work? And so I started reading about, things to do to sort of help with conception, and it sort of kept coming across this idea of, lose weight to have a healthy pregnancy and lose weight to have an easier time getting pregnant. And some of the guys in my lab decided they were going to go on a diet, and I was like, oh yeah, that sounds good. I'll lose some weight. I've got some love handles that, I'm not, the hugest fan of. And so I'm going to, go on a diet along with them. It seemed like, a fun group thing to do, keep each other accountable, whatever. So I dramatically cut my calories to 1,500, which is, that's what you often hear for, like, that's what you should do to lose weight. And I think that honestly, that anybody going that low is really going to shock their system. And, knowing what I know now, I would never, ever, ever, ever recommend that somebody do that. And certainly for me, I was also exercising a lot at the time because I was doing things that I loved. I was playing ice hockey and volleyball and squash and lifting weights and playing golf with my husband on the weekends. And that level of fuel was nowhere near enough for my body and for that amount of exercise. So I lost weight pretty quickly, and I was like, this is fabulous. I look great. I finally got a 6-pack, and then I went off the pill to try and get pregnant, and my body was like, not gonna happen. So the fact that my physique was sort of, kind of ideal at this point, my body didn't care about that. It didn't care about how I looked. It was like, you do not have enough body fat. You are not eating enough to support a pregnancy. There's no way I'm going to let this happen right now. And this was over 10 years ago. My oldest is now almost 11. So there was like no information on the internet about this at all. I mean, it was, my doctor sort of said, oh, well, maybe you should eat a little bit more and maybe you could exercise a little bit less, but nobody really told me this is what you need to do. So I kind of tried, I started eating a bit more and I cut down my exercise, and, it didn't really work. I didn't get a period for 8 months until I went on vacation. I went to South Africa to visit my family. I was actually born there.
Okay.
And I got my first period and I was like, this is amazing. And, it was 3 weeks of no ice hockey, no squash, no volleyball, no weightlifting. All I was doing was walking and playing golf. And so I think my body, and plus eating, I just wasn't tracking what I was eating at all. So I think my body really appreciated that, and it went ahead and had its first period. And then I got back and I'd already had some doctor's appointments lined up. And so I had an ultrasound and they're like, you have a 13 millimeter follicle. And I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. And then I went back 2 days later and you still have a 13 millimeter follicle. So we're going to put you on injection. And so that kind of led down the slippery slope of fertility treatments. And they didn't work for me. I know they do for some people. I think part of it might have been that I was still exercising too much. Part of it's just, bad luck. So I did 4 cycles of that and it didn't work. So my doctor was like, well, I guess we should go to IVF next. And so we were going to do that, but I was waiting for insurance to change over because I live in Massachusetts where we are lucky to have IVF covered by your health insurance. But I wasn't insured on a Massachusetts plan, so all very complicated.
Yes.
So I was waiting for a month.
Yeah.
And then I just decided, my doctor wanted me to go on birth control pills. And I was like, no way. Why would I want to do something to stop myself from getting pregnant when I want to get pregnant? It made no sense to me. So I did not go on the birth control pills, and I used ovulation predictor sticks every day. And on cycle day 42, I got a positive. And I was like, oh my God. Something I never, ever thought I would see again, because the doctors were really not supportive of the idea of my ever regaining natural cycles. And so my husband and I did our thing. And 2 weeks later, I got a positive pregnancy test.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was, it was a long journey, but it really gave me a lot of insight into the way that the medical system treats women with amenorrhea. Obviously going through injectable cycles, which, some people do end up needing to do to get pregnant the first time. So, I know all about that. I have, the only thing I haven't done at this point is the oral meds. I have never taken Clomid or letrozole. But I did end up doing IVF for my third son because we wanted 3 kids. And I got pregnant for the third time and then had a miscarriage. And then we tried for a year after that and were not able to get pregnant. So I was like, what the heck, I'll give IVF a try. And it actually worked the first cycle. So I feel really lucky in that respect. So.
Wow, what a journey you've been on. And I again kind of understand that process too, of having to go through that. And you really do have to become sort of an advocate for your own health and figuring out your own body. And it sounds like you spent a lot of time and kind of research on doing that. So how did you decide to write the book then?
Well, so when I was pregnant with my first son, I ended up getting put on bed rest at about 28 weeks because I was having Braxton Hicks contractions, which are sort of like the practice contractions, but I was having them every 2 to 3 minutes. So they told me really don't do anything. I mean, you can go to work, but don't walk, don't exercise, don't do anything. So I had a lot of free time on my hands.
Yes.
I've always been a very active person and out and doing things. So I ended up finding a board online of other women who were experiencing hypothalamic amenorrhea, which we will call HA from now on because it's so much easier.
Yes, thank you.
And so I found I really enjoyed sharing my story and sharing the research that I had done and what I had learned. And, I got to know these women really, fairly intimately. I mean, I'm still friends with some of them 10 years down the road. And so I posted on that board and I kept posting and I kept posting and kept posting. And I really found that was my passion. I would spend hours every night, after my son was born, I would still go on there, and I really enjoyed sharing my knowledge. And over time, people, anytime a question came up, I would go and, research in the medical literature and, find out everything I could, and then give people a solid answer with science behind it. And after a while, they kept, people on the board were saying, "Oh, you should write a book. You should write a book." And eventually, I was like, "Yeah, I should write a book." So that's, I never ever pictured myself as an author. I'm not, I'm not a creative type. I'm a science type. I do science, but this is my passion, and I actually loved writing it. I loved putting together all the research that I'd done over the years and researching more. And I did a survey of over 300 of the women who had been on that board with me to sort of put some data around how long does it take to get your period back? What do you need to do? How did you lose your period in the first place? And then I did, a bunch of questions about what did it take to get pregnant? How long did it take? How many cycles? How long did it take you to resume cycles after pregnancy? Because a lot of these questions are there's no answers available, and they're all things that people really are interested in knowing.
Absolutely.
So I have all of that in my book, all of the answers to those questions, along with, my story and the stories of other women from the board. I took a lot of their posts and incorporated them into the book, because I think one of the things that really, really is helpful when you're going through trying to recover your periods is hearing from other women that it's worked for them, because it often feels like, oh my God, my body is broken. What have I done? I'm never going to be able to fix this. And often that's the message that you get from the medical establishment, that, you're probably never going to cycle again naturally, or you could gain 20 pounds, you could gain 50 pounds. It's not going to help, so let's just do injections or whatever.
Yeah,
and I think that hearing from other people who have gone through it and been successful really makes a world of difference.
And I loved how in your book, I refer that to a lot of my clients, and they love how you've taken snippets from the blog and tied it into the science, and they're like, oh my gosh, that sounds like my exact same word. So love that.
What an amazing resource.
That's so fabulous. Thank you.
Yeah, from women you've worked with for women out there struggling with this. So can you explain to us a little bit more about what HA is, and what, I know you spoke a little bit on your story, but what causes it and how can it affect our health and fertility?
Absolutely. So HA stems from the two components to the word, hypothalamic. That's because it originates in the hypothalamus, which is the part of your brain, kind of your master control, one of the master controllers in your brain. And then amenorrhea, obviously, is lack of a period. So there are so many inputs that your hypothalamus kind of takes in. There are all sorts of hormones that are produced by various things that we do naturally on a daily basis, like eat and sleep and exercise and experience joy and stress and all of those things. And they all create hormones in our body or other chemicals. And our hypothalamus kind of takes all of those in, and it decides what to do. So there are sort of 5 factors that play into hypothalamic amenorrhea, and they all help to shut down the hypothalamus because it is trying to conserve energy or protect us from things that might be harmful to our body. So the first one is eating. So that when we eat, there are hormones that are released that tell our body how much we've eaten and what types of food we're eating, because different components like protein or fat actually cause the release of different hormones. So our body knows where we're eating, which is amazing. And if you're not getting enough of one particular type of nutrient, like carbs, for example, have been demonized recently, but our hypothalamus senses the level of glucose in our blood, and it senses the levels of insulin. And if those aren't high enough, that can cause it to shut down. So there's both what we're eating and the amount we're eating. There's weight and weight loss. Those are kind of often tied in. I was actually really surprised when I did my survey to find that 82% of the women who responded had lost more than 10 pounds at some point in the past. Certainly that was my experience. I'm fairly confident that it was the weight loss and restricted eating that caused my amenorrhea. But I was really surprised that it was true for that many women, that, 10 pounds or more loss would help, shut down the hypothalamus. And there's, absolute weight So it kind of plays a part. I mean, obviously, the women who have HA do tend to be in smaller bodies. The average BMI, I think, was about 19, but it's absolutely possible to have HA in, any size body, and it's really much more about, restriction and undereating and overexercise. So I think that's an important thing for people to realize, is that often doctors will look at somebody and say, oh, that can't be your problem because you look perfectly fine. But the way somebody looks doesn't tell you what they're doing to their body and what their actual intake is. And so I think that's really important for people to understand.
And I appreciated that aspect in the book too, where it talks about how regardless of their weight, if they're having a drastic weight loss, the body and the brain look at that as a stressor, so they could still lose their period, even if by BMI category, which we hate that, BMI,
Yes.
they could still lose their period.
Yes. Yep, absolutely. And then exercise is another part of the puzzle. Exercise can affect things in two ways. One, obviously, it burns energy. So that means you have to be eating that much more to compensate for your exercise. And two, exercise can also release various hormones in the stress pathway that also shut down the hypothalamus. So like cortisol and cortisol releasing hormone. And in fact, beta endorphins there's a mechanism by which the endorphins that everybody loves from the exercise shut down the hypothalamus.
So, interesting.
That better side.
Actually, exercise can feel like stress relief because of the endorphins, and it makes you feel good, but that's not how your body actually senses it. So that's something that really can be hard for people to wrap their minds around. It's like, but I feel like I'm relieving my stress, but no, your body doesn't see it that way.
Yes, and we talk about that a lot of it's healthy, right? Exercise is healthy.
Yeah.
So, but however, there is a point where too much can be too much for the body, and we have to watch out for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so another interesting thing that I found in my surveys was I was expecting it to be sort of the absolute amount of exercise that was affecting the hypothalamus, but it really seemed to be high intensity exercise that was the problem, and low intensity exercise not nearly so much. So that's why in the book, and when I work with women, I really encourage them to cut down on things like running, ice hockey in my case, sort of the serious biking and other high intensity exercise. And low intensity exercise generally, like walking, the less intense yoga, like hot yoga. I'm not a yoga guy, but I've heard that hot yoga is really quite a workout. So that would go under the high intensity category. But so walking or easy elliptical or that kind of thing tends to be okay. I mean, some people do find that they do have to cut out all exercise in order to restore their periods, but I sort of recommend starting with, okay, low intensity exercise is fine, and let's see where we go from there. And then, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I was going to talk a little bit further about kind of what that recovery looks like and sort of your experience of what that looks like in terms of getting our periods back.
There's just one more thing that I want to talk about, if you don't mind. So the other thing is psychological stress and anxiety. And that absolutely can play a part in amenorrhea as well, because, you of course hear stories of women who lose their period after a very stressful event, like the death of a family member or a divorce. And so it's very clear that stress alone can cause missing periods. And then, of course, stress in concert with all of these other things. And the other thing is we often don't realize that sort of aiming to be healthy all the time and clean eating and, tracking everything, that's actually a form of stress. That's hard work. And, I was recently asked to review a new sort of tracking app by Chris Sandel. I don't know if you guys know him. It's called Tummy. And I was like, yeah, I'll download it and check it out. And I entered one meal and I was like, I cannot.
Forget it. Yes, it is stressful.
Too much time and effort.
Nobody's got time for that.
Well, that's such a good point. I mean, again, talking to our clients, just trying to get pregnant and going through the infertility process of why and what's going on is such a stressor, right? So
we
talk a lot about managing that stress as you're going through something that is an abnormal process or a stressful process. So such a good point that you make about that psychological aspect. Mm-hmm.
And then the very last thing is genetics. And there's nothing we can do about that, but I definitely think that plays a part. There have been a couple of studies that have been done in women with HA that have found mutations in various proteins that are kind of involved in the pathway. And so I think that helps to explain why you can have two women who sort of look the same, exercise the same, two marathon runners, for example, and one can be cycling and one cannot be cycling. I mean, part of it is you don't know what they're eating or whatever, but I think it's hard. It can be really hard for people to look at somebody else and say, but she's doing all this stuff and she's still getting her period. Why am I not? And I think it's really important to understand that it's just who we are and our DNA and our history. And, it's everybody is unique and individual, and we all have to figure out what's the best way for us and our own path forward, and not compare ourselves to what other people are doing.
Very true.
Absolutely. So kind of back to that recovery. So looking at our exercise and intensity levels, our diet and what we're putting into our body and if it's enough, looking at sort of that stress piece. Anything else that goes along for recovery? Because what women are going to ask is like, how long is it going to take to get my period back?
Timeline on it.
And it sounds like, everybody is different.
Yes, everybody is different for sure. So I actually have a blog post about this that I'll send to you guys to link to. So I asked this question because, there are women who haven't had their period for 10 or 15 years, and they're like, well, does it mean that it's going to take me that long to get it back? And the answer is absolutely not. The median time to recovery is about 6 months. I was also surprised that it didn't make a difference how long one had been missing a period for. It was about 6 months, regardless of whether it had been 6 months or a year or 10 years the period was missing. Some people can do it in 6 weeks. Some people it takes 8 months or a year. And so, I think that depends on how extreme your eating and exercise habits were. Again, some of it depends on your genetics. Some of it depends on how quickly you're able to make changes to sort of pull back from the habits that have given you HA. Like some people are, okay, I'm just going to stop running, and that's not, that's fine. Other people, that's like the hardest thing that you've ever asked them to do in their lives.
Absolutely.
And so they can't just stop. It takes a little while. And so maybe you cut out one run a week. You slow down a little bit. You don't do quite as many long runs. And, you sort of work towards maybe cutting it out entirely. Maybe you don't need to cut it out entirely. I mean, I think it's really important to understand that everybody is different and everybody's path is going to be different. And there's definitely no one size fits all recovery answer either.
Yeah. So, and finding what works for your body, really.
And your mental state as well.
Yes.
Your mental state plays a huge part in this. I often find that women don't get their period back until they're like, I can't take it anymore. I just have to let go. And then it's like, 2 weeks later, there's my period. And it's, it's not like a switch you can just turn. It's a process you have to go through, and, learning to appreciate your body for what it is and not the fact that it looks like the magazine bodies, maybe your body has to be a little bit softer, and learning to be okay with that and appreciate your body for all the amazing things that it can do for you, and not just the way it looks. Because there's so much more to us than the way we look. And, I've been learning more and more and more about that over these past 10 years, and appreciating more and more, the amazing people that I've gotten in touch with. And I don't care what they look like. And I've given up on caring what I look like so much too. I don't put on makeup anymore. I don't care. It's just all too much work.
And continuing with that, one of the things, again, that struck me was we're so rigid with what we've defined as normal weight or normal weight range. But in the book, it said that actually what BMI of 22 was the fertile zone that you found for most women. Was that correct?
So I would say that's sort of the minimum. I mean, some women can restore periods at a lower BMI than that, but I always encourage women to sort of aim for that as a target. And actually, I've been in touch with an endocrinologist recently who has said to me that she works with older women and she sees so many women at like BMI of 18, 19 coming in with osteoporosis at 60 or 70. And she's like, I work so hard to keep my weight up because weight definitely plays a part in that. The more you weigh, the more your bones have to work and the stronger they get. So, our society has sort of made us think that this, women who are thin are really ideally healthy, but I've actually been, there's really no evidence for that. It's all based on aesthetics and not really health. And, certainly not long-term health. I mean, whether you're missing your period or not, like just the idea of having osteoporosis, I mean, it's terrifying. And,
You make such good points, and I know things that Becca and I are talking about throughout our day and our jobs. So we know you're a busy mom and now a book author. So how do you say you live kind of this Phit philosophy in terms of balance, improving performance, health, intellect, and time for self? So how do you find the balance?
I love the name of the podcast.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Balance. I think it's perfect. So I was thinking about that today, and I feel like performance really depends on where you are in your life. Like for me right now, performance is not about doing well in a race or doing well in ice hockey. It's about being fit enough to do whatever my kids want to do. Like we're up in New Hampshire and we just went to a ropes climbing course. And, I love that I was strong enough to climb up all the ladders and do whatever. And, so for me, that's what performance is. It's being able to hang out with my kids and do what they want to do and, keep up with them, basically. And then health, I work really hard to just live and, take care of my body without obsessing over it and really thinking about my underlying health and not tying it to what I look like. And I think that's, I go to the gym once a week to lift weights because I like feeling strong. I don't do it because I want to have muscles. I just do it because I like to be able to lift my kids and, mow the lawn and do those other things that work my muscles. And I feel like working them in the gym a little bit helps with that. I play ice hockey. I like it for the cardio aspect and the camaraderie and the competition.
I love that.
So I just try. I try and keep, as you say, balance. It's all about balance. I have some me time in there. I have some exercise time. I have some play time. So that's where I stand on my health. And then intellect was the third. Yeah. So that I still enjoy researching. I'm putting together a series of blog posts on supplements and helping with HA because there's so many women who come into my Facebook support groups and they're like, I'm taking this, that, and the other thing. I'm like, why?
Save your money.
I'm just gonna take it all. Yes.
Exercise less. You can take all the Vitex you want. If you're not doing those other things, it's not going to help. But as I said, I'm a scientist and I like to research and really have the scientific basis for why I might recommend something or why I might not. So that's one of the things I'm doing for that. I just enjoy reading and, supporting people and doing my research, and that's all kind of part of who I am. And then remind me again what the T
stands for self.
Oh, yes. Well, that's kind of wrapped into all of what I just said.
Yes.
I take care of my kids. I work. Working with women to recover from HA I really consider time for myself because it's something that I'm so passionate about, and I cannot tell you how good it feels when somebody comes to my group and posts, I got my period today, or, oh my God, look at my pregnancy test.
That's such good news to hear.
Really. So all of that is my me time.
Oh, that sounds great. I just can see and hear, well, I can see you, the viewers can't, but how passionate you are about this subject and your research and then helping women out there become moms. It's amazing work. So thank you so much for joining us today. And for all of you out there, if you'd like to find out more about Dr. Rinaldi and her book, please go to No Period Now What. You can purchase her book through there. And then we'll put information to link to her in our show notes. And then I know you're going to pass on some links too. So we'll put that in there as well. So thanks so much, Dr. Rinaldi.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This has been so fun.
Of course. Take care.
Have a great rest of your vacation.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you to our sponsor today, Centimano Counseling. Centimano Counseling is the premier perinatal mental health practice in Kansas City, treating mood disorders during pregnancy and postpartum, perinatal loss, infertility, eating, and exercise disorders. Go to centimano.com for further information about the practice and services. For additional information on today's topic and guests, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Fit for a Queen. And
Hashtag Fit for a Queen.
Don't forget to rate us on iTunes. We can't wait for you to join us next time on Fit for a Queen.
Bye, Queens.